All right, looks like the pace of people entering has slowed down, so we can get started. We will be recording this. You probably just saw a message come up and hosting that online as we do for all these office hours. So you can come back and refer to it at a later date or share with colleagues who may not have been able to attend. So if you've joined us before for these office hours, we just have our general introduction slides, and the objective for these office hour meetings are to have consistency across the state within the dam safety community of practice, hopefully improve our design and review efficiency, for us to, at MDE, to provide news and information on policies and processes, and then to receive feedback as well, and also some insight into upcoming changes and advancements. Often try to hold these on a quarterly basis. It has been a little while since we did have our last one, and part of that's because of the probable maximum precipitation study, which is about to launch, and we wanted to time it appropriately so that we could introduce you all to the PMP study. It's something we've talked about in some of these past meetings and through project reviews as well, but want to share that news with you as well. So we'll focus mostly on that today. If at any time you have questions during this call, this is, kind of an informal conversational thing we do, right? So just raise your hand and we'll acknowledge you and help you with your question or your comment or whatnot. As always, if you have a very specific project question, let's take that offline. Unless it's a very broad, we're looking for broad picture questions, right? Big picture policy stuff applicable to many projects, and then that's a great idea to have a free and open exchange of ideas. And obviously, of course, I think we'll keep it civil. So we like to start out with what's new and what's coming, and then open the floor for questions. So what's new, or what's new-ish, I will say, because since we last had our office hours, we have put a number of things up on the website and pass those around through our email communications. That's another one of those things where we're continuing to add folks to that email list for distribution. So if you or your colleagues aren't getting it, or you're not sure, shoot us an email or put your name in the chat, and your email in the chat rather, we can make sure you're added to that. With that being said, what's newish on our front, and why are we excited about it? The first is our job aid for both for designers and for reviewers. We felt that this job aid significantly improved on an older draft one that we had. It provides some additional context and links to references that are out there. And of course, this is a job aid. It's not requirements checklists. So you'll find things that may not apply to your project that are in the checklists or the job aid. Use those words interchangeably. You may find things in the job aid or not find things in the job aid that do apply to your project. But we're hoping that through the adoption of folks who are submitting to MDE and other entities who are using that job aid and perhaps submitting it with their application, then our staff also cross-referencing it, it will help improve consistency, which is, of course, a frustration of many in the past, is that, it's you're asked for one thing in one place and asked for another thing in another place, or maybe the same person asks you for two different things at two different times, right? And sometimes that's appropriate, but where we can improve consistency, we can improve, having application packages that are, more substantially complete, and some efficiency can be derived from that. So that job aid is up on the website, and we hope you take a look at it if you haven't, and consider adopting its use. Recently, we also put out, after, golly, probably 18 months of back and forth and, some fast-paced work and some slowdowns, 2 policy memos. As a reminder, the policy memos really apply for all dams, and then as Comar has worded is, small ponds are to be designed in accordance with NRCS Pond Code 378 from 2000, as well as our department's policies and procedures. So these would apply. Policy Memo 22 came out because there was widespread, disagreement or uncertainty or what have you on how we determine the embankment height, right? Is it the upstream toe? Is it from the center line of the dam? Is it from the downstream toe to the crests of the dam? In law, it refers to the original stream channel, but what if there is no original stream channel? What if we're an offline structure, right? And then what really is the toe? These are all questions that people ask, and there's many opinions on this. So Policy Memo 22 is really taking at its heart the language used in Environment Article 5503, which is the law, one of the laws that governs dams in the state. And we're basically saying it's the lowest point of fill on the upstream face of the dam. So it's not necessarily where the upstream slope changes angle and intersects with the pond bottom, but it's the lowest point of fill. Oftentimes that may be they may be same and might be co-located, but particularly for newer stormwater management practices and those with filtration media, that may not always be the case. And when we say fill, it's not just the embankment fill, but if you're excavating down into natural ground to construct your spillway or whatnot, that is then fill as well. So it's that lowest point, the lowest point the shovel touches, basically, in your project, to the low point on the crest of the dam. Crest of the dam, not including the auxiliary spillway, because hopefully the auxiliary spillway is not on the crest of the dam. It's adjacent to the dam. So that policy's out there, and we do think that applying that policy, in addition to policy 23, there's going to be some benefits for particularly smaller scale stormwater practices that of the infiltration media that exists, it kicks it in some cases to a small pond design when the embankment and the breach risk is relatively low. So there's that. So that's Policy Memo 23. Taking a step back here, as many folks know, NRCS released a new Pond Code 378 about 2 years ago. That has not been incorporated into regulation yet. So the original Pond Code, or not the original, but the one we've all been familiar with for now 25 years, from January 2000, still is the reference that we use in regulations. But that new version from NRCS removed certain elements, including what would be exempt from small pond approvals. So we felt there's value in reiterating that new policy, and it does. It reiterates that traditional 4-foot embankment or 6 foot plus 40,000 cubic feet or excavated are exempt from requiring a small pond approval. But in addition to that, we've also added, really what we call a micro pond, very small BMP, where there's less than or equal to 8,000 cubic feet of active storage. These structures are very small, right? They're swimming pool size or perhaps a little bit bigger. And if you don't need a dam safety permit to build a swimming pool in your backyard, it seems likewise appropriate that we could exempt these from approvals. So those are out there. Next, we've had this around for a long time, a couple of years now, and passed it around, but we've put it on the website so it's more accessible, is a suggested scope of work for an engineering qualifications for a comprehensive dam review. And we've asked some high and significant dam owners to engage in those reviews, and some have taken it upon themselves to engage in them as well. And what is a comprehensive dam review? Well, it's more than just a visual inspection, right? That we all do as the asset owner or as the regulator, a periodic check, and we're looking for changes or deficiencies. A comprehensive dam review dives a little bit deeper. It looks into design assumptions. It looks into what was the state of engineering practice when the dam was designed versus what it is right now? And is there a gap? And does that gap present a concern from a potential failure mode standpoint? It may warrant some reevaluation, actually, recrunching the numbers, doing the H&H again, looking at slope stability, looking at structural stability and things like that. But, a lot of our dams are over their 50-year intended design life. And it makes sense to really, give a thorough look under the hood and make sure that, they're either good to go for the next 50 years or identify and prioritize what types of repairs might be needed or upgrades so that we can extend for the next 50 years as well. So that's out there for folks to use. It's suggested, right? It's you'd have to craft it to what works for you and your organization and how you do procurement and all of that. But it gives a little understanding of what we think a comprehensive dam review should consist of. All right, now we're into the new stuff, right? The stuff that is basically, less than a few weeks old here. MDE is undergoing a couple IT enhancement projects right now. And I think we'll all be very happy to hear that, as I'm told, by the end of this calendar year, it sounds like there'll be an electronic or, an e-portal for permit applications across the agency. So hopefully gone are the days of mailing in 7 paper copies of your JPA and, chopping down a forest to get that information to MDE. It can all be done electronically. That's very good. That's going to make some efficiencies. I think there'll be, it will be less touches to go from a permit application being, delivered to MDE to the time it gets into a dam safety reviewer's hands. So immediately we should see some time benefits from that. That being said, we're also recognizing, and we've been trying to be more proactive, that people will apply for a JPA. And the JPA, particularly for small ponds, it's because that project may have wetlands or waterway impacts. But because it has a stormwater pond in it, it gets forwarded to dam safety. Now we're opening it up and reviewing it. We oftentimes will exempt it, but that doesn't mean there's not back and forth between ourselves and the engineering consultants. Where the project may already be in the SCD review portals themselves, and they already may be reviewing it, right? It's a duplication of efforts. So we're trying to correct that by virtue of requiring the Appendix B, the application for a small pond or dam, to be included with all the JPAs when you intentionally want us, right, to look at the dam or small pond. If you don't intend for us to look at the dam or small pond because an SCD is already reviewing it, don't include Appendix B. And we've created flags in the system that will mean that if there's no Appendix B, it won't get routed to us for review. It'll just be the wetlands and waterways review that you were anticipating. So we're looking to effect that change on July 1st. There'll certainly be a grace period, right? But we do really want to. We'll be reminding you multiple times ahead of July 1st. And then also, if we're getting applications after July 1st without the Appendix B, we'll be reaching out to you and saying, hey, are you aware that this was a change? And do you want us to review it, or do you want is the SCD already handling it? So we really think, while sometimes that review, and we can exempt a pond for SCD review, sometimes fairly quickly, it's still quite a significant portion of the applications that we handle are these exemptions. So if we can alleviate that workload or streamline it, then the projects that are actually coming to our office for review can get more attention from our staff. So hopefully that makes things a little more efficient. We also very recently put some template specifications for dams and small ponds on the website. These have been floating around for a while now. And we've been seeing, I think, increased occurrences whether it be from direct observation ourselves or from referrals from our partners, maybe in the districts and whatnot, or the county level, that we're seeing a lot of problems during construction and or with inadequate as-built documentation. And I think that, you know, there's a direct link. Maybe it's not 100%, you know, the cause, but there is a direct link to the MD 378 specifications that admittedly we all copy and paste on the plan sheets and we put out there in the world. It's my understanding through conversations with NRCS staff who've been around for a while that those were never intended to really be a cut and paste thing. They were intended for the convenience of the dam safety engineering community, that you'd customize them for your specific projects. And we've fallen away from that. And part of the problem is things like soil compaction testing or concrete testing, right? It alludes to it and it provides a little bit of detail, but it doesn't provide all the detail that's necessary to really have effective QA/QC on construction projects. So for projects that come through our shop, dams and small ponds alike, unless you've developed, you know, your own templates or your own specifications, because that's what your company, your engineering firm uses, we're going to ask people to take these template specifications and customize them, right? So remove the sections that don't apply to your project, review the sections that do apply, and make sure that they make sense or alter them. So just as an example, you have a concrete spillway pipe and you're replacing a concrete spillway pipe and that's the only thing you're doing for your project. There's no need to have the specifications for metal pipe and plastic pipe. It's not part of the project. You can take it out. So we're also going to ask everybody else to strongly consider adopting these template specifications. Again, we think it will deliver better QA/QC, better constructed facilities. That's better for the owners in the long run, and alleviates those headaches at the end of the day where, you know, it's going into an as-built review by perhaps our office or SCD, and they're saying, well, there's all these things that are wrong, let's say, right? Or if we had known about it during construction, we could have caught that and addressed it. But now we're concerned that there's not, you know, adequate documentation of the clay core that was put in, or adequate documentation of the compaction testing for the embankment, or any other of these items. So we're putting them out there as a resource, and we're going to be asking folks for projects that come through our office. They'll be required. And again, we strongly encourage the districts and other consultants to just incorporate that into your standard practice in lieu of the traditional 378 specifications. So I think before we start talking about the PMP study, maybe it's a good opportunity to take a break, catch a breath, and see if anybody has questions about what we've talked about so far.
Hey, John, this is Ganwan.
Hi, Ganwan.
I have a quick question. So if we have a dam which is super wide embankment, then it will come to dam safety. And if it comes to dam safety, would it be in the inventory for dam safety, or will it be exempt?
If it's a super wide embankment that that meets also the dam criteria, right, then it will become on the dam inventory. So if it is, you know, less than less than a square mile drainage area and less than 20 feet tall and all the traditional small pond things, it would be basically a super wide small pond, right? And that would be handled, it can always be handled by MDE, but it could also be handled by the district or state highway in their delegated review or whatnot. But if it exceeds that criteria, if it exceeds that criteria and it meets the dam criteria and it's not a culvert, and it's a super wide dam, then yeah, that would come to our office, have to come to our office and be permitted and be classified and put on the inventory as a dam.
Thank you. Because we have seen places where we have small pond, which is does not meet the dam safety or dam criteria, but it's in the regulated waters.
Mhm.
So that basically comes, or some places where we have a small pond, but the embankment goes all the way up more than 20 feet, and then there's a super wide roadway on there, and still it comes to you guys. So it will be classified as dam, if I understood from you. Might be the criteria might be lower for from you guys on the construction of that, but it still will be considered as dam.
Yeah, I think you've got it right there, and we've also, as an aside, and there's still ongoing conversations, but we have engaged in many conversations with State Highway Administration and Federal Highway about the notion of highway embankments being considered dams and listed as dams, and that's a can of worms, to say the least. But we definitely would encourage, I think, as coming out of those conversations, we encourage folks to try to avoid cases where the road embankment is basically holding back the water, right? So if you need stormwater management and you can do it so that stormwater is contained, let's say, and not relying on that road embankment to help hold the water inside its area, right? Then that's to everybody's advantage. I know LOD and other site constraints make it very difficult, but once the road embankment starts being relied upon to hold back water for a stormwater pond, it particularly when it's a federally funded highway, it gets into a very tricky situation, and it's something we should all strive to avoid if possible. And I'm sure if anybody here is working with State Highway on projects, you can talk to them about that as well, and I think they'll echo those sentiments, and we can work together to try to find solutions to solve the problems.
Thank you. You nailed it. That was very helpful.
Let's see. I'm seeing a chat comment here. The last page of the sketches, the weir key bottom is shown below the dotted line. Is this correct? Should the dotted line be to the bottom of the key? I think that's a great question. In my opinion, I would not. I believe it's correct. And let's go into some of the thinking behind this. And bear with me, because there's some long held, I guess, conservative thoughts here that play into it. But and what that is, that those long held notions is that for lack of a better way of describing it, it has been considered that natural undisturbed ground is not really going to erode when if an embankment were to fail. But all the rest of the man-placed fill above it is prone to eroding away. And this is really kind of, again, driving to that notion of like, what's the breach bottom elevation? And really, where is the hazard coming from in a dam failure? So it's, how much of that volume of water that's being impounded could be released. And we've traditionally said, it's basically anything that's within that zone of man-placed fill is susceptible to being released. And for better or worse, once you hit natural ground, you basically stop the breach progression. And that's, there's some elements of truth to that, and some elements that's maybe a little bit hopeful, and there's probably a gray area, but that's the convention we've gone on. So to the point about the key then, is that that's kind of an isolated element, and it's surrounded by natural soil, I guess, upstream and downstream, right? So you're kind of arresting that, because it's breached down to that natural ground, while somewhere in the middle of that level of natural ground where the key was cut into it, that little portion might be quote unquote erodible. You're kind of protected by the fact that you've got that baseline underneath the weir elevation. that protects it. Let's see the follow-up question. So the key has natural ground on both sides, whereas the riser bottom slab does not. And yes, that's kind of the concept we're trying to drive to, right? And it's really it's once you hit that natural ground, with engineering reason, right? If you have a little tiny wedge of natural ground, and tons of fill on either side of it, we're probably going to say that, that's not the spirit or the intent of where like the breach bottom is. But if you've got a broad area of natural ground, we're basically saying that's the breach bottom elevation, and that's where you can basically measure that also then therefore the height from. So we're tying those two concepts together, that the height, we regulate these dams because of the concern of the potential failure, right? So it would make sense that as we assess these criteria for what's in or out of regulation or in and out of approvals, we go back to that basics, I guess, of what are we trying to protect against? And it's that hazard of breach. So where the breach hazard stops is a good measuring point. And hopefully I've made that clear. But if there's cases, or if people, have, obviously those were very schematic sketches, right? We could add some more real world sketches if people wanted to share them and ask for opinions. There's some areas where it is kind of requires some engineering judgment and nuance, as so much of the stuff we do, but kind of hope that the sketches would illustrate that big picture concept.
I had a quick question about a small pond with a super wide embankment where the super wide embankment is a roadway.
Yep.
And utilities in the roadway. If you guys have had any discussions about the best approach for some of that water tightness.
Yeah. It's, I guess our policies and the way we've discussed stuff internally is a lot of consideration of what's there versus what's proposed, I guess. So are we doing more harm by opening up the entire road embankment, right, because of pre-existing infrastructure that may or may not have all the desirable design elements in it, right? And I think, our notion is that if you weren't already digging that area up, then probably kind of let those utilities stay as they are. If you're putting them in brand new, or you are already kind of opening up the whole road section, then we think it's a good idea, recommended to have those defensive design elements, for those utilities. I would say, and then on top of that, we have had conversations in the past. I'm thinking of two in particular, where it was very large WSSE transmission mains that would run basically at the toe of the embankment, and they were existing. And the conversation we had there was really is how old are these, right? We all know that utilities can last a long time in the ground, but there is usually some replacement cycle. And the question for us was, are they going to be, based on what WSSC knows and what their policies are, and the best available information, if these mains are going to be torn up and are on the schedule for replacement in 5 years from now when the construction is happening, can we try to sync up the timing of those projects, right? And then potentially move the mains a little bit, so that they're not right underneath the toe of the dam. Does that kind of help answer your question there, Lars?
Yes, thank you.
All right, super. And then I saw a question about if we have separate specs that cover the templates. Do we need to place templates on the drawings? We can refer to a spec book. Absolutely, you can refer to a spec book. I think if we're reviewing a project in our house, we would probably ask to see the spec book. But in my opinion, I think that's an owner prerogative, I guess, whether they want specs on the plans themselves or if they have a separate spec book, if that's adequate. I would defer to what the owner's preference is in that case. All right. Anybody else before we dive into the PMP study? And thank you for all the good questions too. Well, let's move to PMP, and of course, we usually schedule these for 2 hours, and at some point the conversation fades off, right? We decide we are done. So, if anything comes up in in people's minds as we go along, we can stop and do some more questions. So, here's the big news: is that we are about to release the Maryland PMP study, and when I say about to release, I can't probably give an official date, but it's going to be less than, it'll be before tax day for sure, and probably well before tax day. So that is coming. We've messaged it in the past, and now the day is really here. So what is the Maryland Probable Maximum Precipitation Study? I'm going to try to say just PMP so I don't stumble over that. For high and significant hazard dams, we use PMP for design of spillway capacity. And then for breach analysis hazard classification, many of you have used PMP and half PMP in those studies. And we've traditionally derived that PMP information from hydrometeorological reports, HMRs 51, 52. And they have been around for decades. I believe, give or take, 50 years at this point. Since they were released. And the storm data doesn't even capture some of the storms of record in Maryland that were used to develop those PMPs. Let's see, jumping ahead a little bit here, I guess. This is not a linear argument, or linear thought, but as we release this PMP study, we're going to ask that the results of it be incorporated into all current and planned design and analysis efforts. We recognize if you're, at 90% design and you hadn't had this incorporated into it yet, we can have separate, case-by-case conversations. But that being said, we think that there is a possibility, strong possibility that for many of the designs, we could actually see reduced peak inflows and potentially reduced peak water surface elevations. So compared to the previous PMP depths, and, of course, the rainfall depth is only one element of all the hydrology and hydraulics that goes into the design. Compared to previous PMP depths from HMR 51, we're seeing a wide range of reductions for most drainage area sizes and storm durations across the state. The lower eastern shore, because it has more effects from tropical cyclones, is seeing minor increases, basically varying from 0% or status quo to up to 5% increase. So taking a little bit of a step back here, what is PMP if it's not a term you use a lot or hear? It's the maximum theoretically possible rainfall for a given location and duration. It's based on historic storm events, atmospheric conditions, regional climate patterns, and really also terrain too, which kind of plays into all of those. Why did we reevaluate the PMP in this study? First of all, there's really a national push to reevaluate it, both from individual states and nationally. So in 2022, Congress passed the PRECIP Act, which directed NOAA to evaluate the current status of PMP and make a plan for updating it nationally. In 2024, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine released a report on the PMP, and they basically looked at, is the current means and methods of calculating the PMP, is it still appropriate? Is it still sound science? And then recommendations for how we should, view that in the future. The NASM study did say that the current methodologies, of course with better data though, is still sound science, though they did advocate for potential a little bit of a reconsideration in the next few decades. We're also seeing a number of our adjoining states to Maryland conducting site-specific or state-specific PMP studies. For the past few years, Virginia and Pennsylvania have had studies, and those study regions basically covered a significant portion of Maryland. New Jersey is also about to wrap up their study, and with all of the overlap we're seeing, there was reasonably so a lot of questions from consultants of, can we use the PMP study from Pennsylvania, let's say, to design in Maryland? We thought really hard about that and said, well, we're not sure we feel 100% comfortable because we weren't involved in that PMP study and know everything that went into it. We believe the science is probably sound, but it's hard for us to say yes on that. But that inspired us to look into and find ways to get a Maryland study done, which we've done. We also have 50 plus years of storm data, and not just storm data, but climate data, terrain data, topographic data that we can build on from the data set that was used to create HMR 51. There's benefits for smaller drainage areas because the PMP, it looked at it basically for the entire east half of the country. And I'll show some examples of what the information provided for design looked like, and it's just not a very dense grid of design criteria of data to make curves and provide interpolations from. And they stopped at 10 square miles. And we're seeing that many dams in Maryland have drainage areas significantly less than 10 square miles. And if we can have a more refined grid, we can have better results for smaller drainage areas. Then lastly, and I'll show this in a slide, I think it might be the next or the following one. Basically, Washington, Allegheny, and Garrett County lie in what's called the stippled region of the Appalachian Mountains in HMR. And the HMR document basically says things may be right or things may be wrong, but there's complicated terrain factors in those areas, and the values we're providing, we know that more work was needed to refine them in those areas, and we didn't do the work. So now for dams in Western Maryland, and we have looked at that enhanced terrain effects and can't account for that. And this is an example, right? This is your traditional HMR 51 chart. It's the all-season 6-hour 10 square mile PMP. And you look, Maryland is basically the top of Maryland. North of Maryland is the 27 contour. The southern end of Maryland is at the 28 contour, or somewhere in between. And then you can look at the whole western part of the state is in the stippled region. These are hand interpolated lines based on kind of a very coarse data cell size. I don't have the exact numbers for Maryland at my fingertips, but I know, when you compare basically the number of grid points that were used to develop these curves here for Virginia, when they did their study, they basically had 1,000 times factor. I think it was something like there was 23 grid points that helped inform the HMR 51 curves in Virginia, and their study had something like 24,000 grid points that helped really refine these, I'll call them contour lines, but I'm a dirt engineer, so you water resources folks can tell me what the right term is. Isohedrals, I believe, or something like that. All right, so let's dive a little deeper. What does this mean? So traditionally, what we have done in Maryland is we've had a single duration, evaluate the 6-hour storm with a single depth. It's 27, somewhere between 27 and 28 inches. And we've used a temporal distribution of that rainfall known as the critically stacked methodology, which is basically like the worst 15-minute segment is stacked within the worst half an hour and the worst hour and the worst 2 hours. It creates a curve, and I've got a demonstration of that later, where an immense amount of rain falls in a very short window in the middle of the storm, and then it tapers off before and after that. It's widely believed to be overly conservative for what actual rainfall events have provided at PMP level storms. As I mentioned before, with the 10 square mile drainage area, the advantage of this study is that it can reduce it down into smaller drainage areas, which can help refine the numbers. But then you also, for areas over 10 square miles, you had to basically discount the rainfall depths because you weren't going to see that level of storm event over a really large drainage area. It was like 10 square miles. That centroid of the storm is where that 26 or 27, 28 inches of rain would fall, and then it would slowly be less outside of it. We have implementation guidance, and we'll be having all this, so don't worry if you're seeing this right now and saying, how am I going to figure this out? We do have some guidance and developing FAQs, and we're going to keep on doing that as people ask questions. So the new study, though, we will evaluate, or you will be evaluating the 2-hour, 6-hour, and 24-hour storms, and maybe 48 and 72-hour storms. And when I say maybe, it's fairly rare that those are the controlling storms. And the implementation guidance will have some additional information on that. But we'll be looking at these shorter duration storms. We're also breaking storms up into different storm types: the local, general, and tropical storms. So each of these storms have different, meteorology that affects how that rain comes, how fast the rain comes down, what types of storms can provide that type of moisture in the air. So far, we're often seeing the local storm as the controlling storm throughout the state. And that local storm is really that small area, kind of more higher intensity storm type that we see, as opposed to like a tropical system coming up the coast. There'll be a tool that will you'll input your drainage area into it. It's a GIS-based tool, and it will give you rainfall depths and distribution curves. And it is a basin average rainfall depth, so no longer having to worry about the aerial reduction factor. There'll be two different, the 2-hour storm has a synthetic curve, and then we're suggesting to use these called the 10% and 90% temporal curves for the other storms. And really what those are statistically based on observed rainfall history patterns. And they basically represent like a storm that, more of the rain falls either in the beginning of the storm event, or it's a slow buildup and it mostly falls in the back end of the storm event. I guess the 50% would be kind of more evenly distributed. So there'll be a couple of evaluations that will need to be done. So there'll be some additional HEC HMS and whatnot that will need to be done to evaluate which is the controlling storm. And that controlling storm is really the one that generates the peak water surface elevation. So we do recognize from the engineering side that there'll be a little more work to do. So consultants, maybe that's good for your bottom line. You'll be charging a little bit more. Owners, you may feel the flip side frustration that, oh boy, there's a little more engineering to do. But we do think this is the best available science now. It really reflects the current state of practice. And we do believe in some, if not many cases, you're controlling peak inflow and peak water surface elevations will drop. So that we're going to be seeing lesser overall volumes of rain than the previous methodologies have. So that being said, I'm going to show a few slides here just to give you a little information, recap what I'm talking about. So this graphic here is, it's our 6-hour, 10 square mile PMP difference, and it's a difference from HMR 51 to the statewide analysis. And it may be a little small to see here, but basically only until you get to that deepest red in like the Salisbury, Lower Eastern Shore area is when you get to a difference that's in the positives, right? And so that's a 0.1 to a 5% increase in PMP depth. Everywhere else, it is a decrease. And including in that, in that stippled region, right? As you can imagine, when we look at the effects of terrain, and people have heard of rain shadows and things like that before, in the area, right in the ridges, we're seeing changes between 35 and 37% reductions in rainfall depths. So again, rainfall depth is only one factor, but hopefully that alleviates a little concern, right? That we're not just ramping up the numbers willy-nilly. This is highly evaluated based on a number of additional new storms plus the historic storms, and accounting for all these terrain effects at a much denser grid size for analysis. We also considered the effects of terrain and topography on the rainfall. So, you know, Maryland, as it was written up in the HMR 51, it was basically equivalent east to west, right? The top end of the state, it was 27, the bottom end, it was 28, but there were no differences east to west. And we've accounted for that in what's called a transposition zone. I say we, this is our consultants. We did not do this work. We had national experts and review panels complete the work and review the work. But we've broken it up into 5 transposition zones, basically mirroring the geologic provinces of Maryland in a lot of ways. And you'll see here on this table, there's some percent differences. So for the, you know, for example, in the coastal plain, in the average, the percent difference from HMR 51 is about a 2.2% drop. When we get into that ridge and valley zone, as we get into the Appalachian Mountains, we see, you know, approximately 24 to 26% difference in the rainfall, the drop in the rainfall depths. So a little more information. We have a very comprehensive report that will be with this on the website. It will give you all the very interesting meteorological data and how the statistics and the analysis went on this. So, you know, if you're thinking you like weather now, this will be probably a fascinating read as we go through. Here's those temporal curves for rainfall distributions. This happens to be the 6-hour local storm east of the Appalachians. And the good thing is you won't need to do this because the GIS software will, you know, apply these temporal curves for you and basically just give you rainfall depth with time. In the center of this, that dotted line is the NRCS Type 2 rainfall distribution. And because I don't have it, it's a pretty good analog for that critically stacked rainfall distribution that was recommended in HMR. So you can see it's a gradual building, and then all of a sudden in the middle of that duration, you know, really in like the middle, I don't know, half an hour of a 6-hour event, you know, 50-60% of the rain falls, and then it tapers off slowly again. Whereas these curves that are derived from statistics from historic storm events, we see a lot more of a gradual building of the rainfall as it comes in. So what else should people know is that the study did evaluate the effects of climate change, various, you know, future greenhouse gas emission scenarios, effects on surface sea temperatures and atmospheric moisture and all of that were evaluated. And this was basically a sensitivity analysis, right? So if we change a variable, does it change that PMP depth outside of the bounds of certainty, right? All of these depths have confidence intervals. So if we do a sensitivity analysis, we change one variable, are we seeing increases or decreases outside of a reasonable range of confidence? The answer for the PMP, and it kind of makes sense, is that because it's a theoretical maximum, is that climate change is not expected to increase the PMP rainfall depths in Maryland. That being said, it does certainly support the notion that PMP or approaching PMP level storms may occur at more regular intervals. As we can all appreciate, you know, even at lesser storms, we're seeing those higher intensity storms at a more and more frequent basis. Lesser storms, you know, so our basically our Atlas 14 level storms were not explicitly investigated. That could probably be a whole nother add-on to the study at a future date. But also Atlas 15 is coming in some point. So they weren't specifically investigated or reported on, but the data does support increases in both rainfall depth and frequency for those lesser, you know, 100-year and less storms from the climate change analysis. The tools we have also include an annual exceedance probability function. And that annual exceedance probability is something that is increasingly being used in risk-informed decision making. So people always ask, how rare is the PMP, right? And people say, oh, it's a million-year storm. It's Noah's Ark level flooding, right? We can actually now put a number to it. In Maryland, it's like 10 to the minus 6, 10 to the minus 8 type probabilities. It's rare. It's very rare, but it's not impossible. And that's an important fact. But that being said, now that you have that probability, that can be factored into risk analysis for dams. And particularly for high hazard, particularly for any dam that has some elements of federal regulation, like FERC for hydropower, that is important, because when you start getting into quantitative risk analysis, you're really starting to figure out, what are my risk drivers? What failure modes should we be concerned with, and then protect against because of their probability of occurrence? And now we have data that can be used for that. It may just be a fun tool for people to run and say, yep, we designed that dam for the 7 million year storm. That's also a nice thing, All right, well, that leads me to the end of what I had wanted to cover. I have my ArcGIS pulled up. I can give you a very quick demonstration of what the tool looks like and what the look and feel of it is. I can open up some spreadsheets and show you some of the outputs so you get an understanding. But I also welcome opening the floor for questions too. Yes, come on.
Hi, John. Again. So, John, my question is, I know you guys deal with a lot of dams, which are bigger dams, but my question is more specific to stormwater management facilities. So we don't design these stormwater facilities for PMP. We do it for 100-year storm event. We do use the PMP for the dam breach analysis, and most of the time for most of the ponds which are classified as dam, the PMP overtop. So we use the brim up storage instead of PMP for the dam breach. Is this a new PMP study changes anything on the stormwater design side?
That's a great question. So I think, and we've very intentionally scaled our breach analysis expectations, right? So, that the screening level and the simplified level and then the full analysis. So if you can get away with, basically doing a brimful storm, then, and that satisfies your analysis and you can conclusively say it's a low hazard storm, water pond, move on, then I don't think there's, as best as I can, in the moment, I don't think it changes anything for you. I think if you are having to run a full standard breach analysis scenario, you would be, looking at the PMP storm events and running them through. So you would be looking at this new study to put those through. And I think in many, but certainly not all cases, right? Once you get to the PMP storm event, particularly for smaller size stormwater ponds, you're right, it is overtopping. There's flooding everywhere. That usually isn't a hazard driver, but you would be I think the big picture is that, again, yes, there is a couple more runs, I think, to do to validate what the controlling storm is than we have done in the past. But I guess the engineer or scientist in me says, well, do we want to rely on data that's 50, nearing 60 years old when we have brand new data with all the best current technology, right? It's a little bit hard, I guess, to defend grandfathering use of the PMP, of the current HMR 51 PMP stuff, because of how old it is, and we know its limitations on use and things like that.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
hopefully everybody's not just shocked right now with this new information, but what we can do. Just to give you a flavor for what, let me find my mouse, what the analysis side looks like. I'll open up a Arc Pro and show you what the tool looks like, because particularly for some folks who aren't don't use GIS very much, it might seem daunting, but really this is pretty simple stuff here to run, and we do have some tutorials. I did see a question: are there any changes to other modeling criteria for dam breach modeling? Not at the moment. There are no other changes. You know, it would be the PMP rainfall information is changing, but all the rest of the methodologies are there. We have received feedback, and there are some clarifications and adjustments to the existing dam breach guidance that's we are working through, and we want to get out this calendar year. Really, those are mainly clarifying questions, right? As people have gone through and they've submitted comments to us, and they said, I'm not sure I'm understanding this section properly. Can you clarify, right? Those are the kind of changes we'll be making as opposed to process. Do we know, that's a great question. Do we know if neighboring states, Pennsylvania, Virginia, exhibit comparable reductions in PMP rainfall depths? The answer is yes. That was something we were very important for us to evaluate and understand, that the studies were performed by the same consultants and generally using the same set of storms, although not, some Pennsylvania storms wouldn't apply to Maryland, some Virginia storms wouldn't apply to Maryland, but largely we expected they should match at the borders. And the answer is yes. It's not a perfect match, but it is, I think, well within reason to expect, with the slight variations in, there might be one or two new storms that were applied since those studies were done, or there might be storms that affected the other studies that don't affect ours. So knowing those caveats, and that is in the report that will be released, and it'll be available on our website. So there is a section that explicitly looks at how do we compare to neighboring states. We felt that was a good validation check and thought the numbers were appropriate. So I guess what I just wanted to show you, so what you'll do to run this tool, it's a pretty straightforward thing. This is a Arc toolbox. So if you were to insert a toolbox, add a toolbox or new toolbox, you'll find that on your hard drive once you download it, and boom, you'll find it here in geoprocessing, right? And now it's very simple to actually run the analysis. You'll browse to a shapefile of the drainage area. You can use USGS StreamStats for most cases to get a drainage area if you don't have one already. We also have some guidance on how to use Maryland's high-resolution terrain data to generate watersheds through other geoprocessing tools in GIS environments. So you'll browse to it. You won't add it to your contents. We learned that that can cause problems. So you don't add it to your, you don't go to add data, add the watershed. You just browse to where that shape file is, right here. You'll give it an output folder. Where do you want the data to be stored? And then we've got the local general tropical storms. We just click and we say, yes, give me the 2, 6, 24. General 2, 6, actually we don't really do 2, 24, 48, 72. Tropical 6, 24, 48, 72. We'd say these are the data we want you to input for us. And then lastly, we collect this button at the bottom, apply temporal distribution. So what that will do is when it calculates the rainfall depth, it will basically scale it to those temporal distributions. So you get an output that is rainfall depth accumulation with time. And then you hit run. Depending on your watershed and the processing speed of your computers, 5 to 15 minutes later, you'll get the output. So we won't let you sit through all that right now. We won't make you do that. But what I can do is, let's see my messy desktop. You'll get results. And I'll give an example here of what you get. PMP, this is what I did. This is for Centennial Dam in Howard County. You'll get 3 folders, one for each storm type. Let's go to the local storm type. Oh, that is right. Sorry. Then you'll get these CSV files of the output. And our guidance distribution talks about this, but you will see here, for example, it's a 4 square mile drainage area. And let's just look at what the PMP depths are. That's would be this first one. Local PMP basin average. Okay. So for the 6-hour PMP storm for Centennial Lake in Howard County, the rainfall depth is 27.14 inches. So it's pretty comparable to what you'd expect to see nowadays, right? If you had to guess. 6-hour PMP, I'm sorry, the 2-hour PMP is 14 inches. That's where it's worth considering the 2-hour PMP for a local storm, right? If you have a really lot of rain falling in a very short period of time, think like an Ellicott City type storm event, 1,000+ year recurrence interval, you might want to evaluate the 2-hour PMP. And then 24-hour PMP is a little bit over 3 inches more than the 6-hour at 30.82. Let me zoom in a little bit so folks can see that. So it is more rainfall depth, but realize it's over an additional 18-hour duration. So will that 24-hour control versus the 6-hour? If I had to guess, probably not, but that is for the engineering community to evaluate. Then you'll also see these temporal distributions. And this is where you can take this data and input it into your hydrology software. So, and it is interesting because it does export the critically stacked, which is the traditional HMR distribution, and the 6-hour Army Corps distribution, which is very similar to the critically stacked, and then the 10th and 90th percentile. So if we were to take a random time, let's say at like, we'll say 240 minutes, right? So you'll see that for the back end loaded storm, we've only have 17 inches of rain fallen. For the front end loaded storm, out of that 20, this is out of that 27 total. The front end loaded storm, we've already had 24 inches of rain fallen. For critically stacked, we've had 21.53. But likewise, if you look at these data, and I'm gonna zoom in again so you can see it, you can see generally a slow increase. But then when you compare that critically stacked, it really jumps up quite a bit in a fast time frame. So you'll have these temporal distributions that you can then use. There's also a 2-hour distribution, and you can put that into your software and route it through your structure and see what that gives you. So there's also some more advanced output options that are available depending on your sophistication. You can get PMP in an ASCII format or NetCDF format. It can download as a file geodatabase. When you download it as a file, or when you export with the file geodatabase, you can also look at the actual storm events themselves that went into the controlling storm for your dam area. So yeah, so that's just a really quick walkthrough. So it's not, in my mind, a very scary process. It's not like a lot of analysis that you need to do. It's really just, having this tool within the Esri environment, telling it where your shapefile is input, telling it where you want to store the output, selecting the right factors and hitting run, and it will do the work for you. So, have I still shocked the audience? Are we contemplating what this means for our work? Does anybody have any additional questions on PMP or anything else we've talked about? Let's see, I'm gonna check the chat. I don't see any additional comments in the chat. Hi, Karen. Yes, you have a question?
Yes, will this be on the website? I had someone come in the office, so I missed the beginning of it. Will this be on the website?
All of the PMP documentation and tools, tutorials, everything, the report will be on our website. It'll go live, very soon. Not this week, but very soon. Less than 2 weeks, more than a couple days. And then this recording here will also be posted and available, so people can see what we talked about. A question here about the do we need an assigned PE engineer in charge even for small ponds? I feel like we probably weren't very clear about that. So there's different expectations. My opinion is that because there's as-built requirements and a PE is expected to, certify or whatever the right word is, that, the as-built matches the design and provide all that stuff, I think it only makes sense that the engineer in charge is identified and retained, provide that as-built documentation. That's what we would expect if it comes to our shop. I don't think that's a 100%. I think there's areas for conversation about that though. But it is helpful to have one person kind of cradle to grave for a project, to avoid some of those construction issues that we've seen where the designer may not even be aware it's under construction and the contractors are just going wild. And not that all contractors are bad or that they do the wrong thing intentionally, but we've had a lot of issues lately where a little more oversight and a little more requirements from QA/QC could have avoided a lot of time and cost after the project was, finished but wasn't closed out. Yep, and there's a good point out comment. Yeah, when construction services are not in design contract, that can be very tricky, and that's one of those areas of further conversation. And there's probably some collective push for owners to recognize the value in having that, right, and advocating for construction services in the design contract. But I know that's not always how things are done. I do want to, we shared this the last time we talked, and I do want to give a little bit of a crystal ball into what we're thinking of, in the next year-ish of what's happening. And some of that's obviously all subject to change. But this was the list, everything in black was the list we had shared last time, what we think is coming. So probably about 8 months ago. And we've knocked out about 4 of those. So that's pretty good. we are still working on updating and addressing some of those prior comments about the dam breach analysis and hazard classification. And then we've got two new things that we're excited about. Is that online permit portal, which I discussed earlier. And then we've decided to do a limited number of webinars this year for general training items. And, you know, how many of those and exactly what the topics are is probably kind of dependent on, you know, staffing workloads and ebb and flow of inspections and construction season inspections and permit reviews. But I do believe we have our first one scheduled. So this is kind of a save the date right now announcement for that. It will be April 30th, Wednesday, April 30th. It's not even on the slide deck because we just discussed this yesterday. Wednesday, April 30th at noon. From noon to 2, we'll be sending out an invite for folks about that. And we want to talk about emergency action planning, some of the new EAP language that was inserted, and some of the expectations and desires for having good communication before, during, and after an emergency. So that'll be April 30th at noon. We'll send out a Google link to that, and we hope to see you there. And also, let's see, I think the next one following that, there might be some more hands-on training about with this PMP tool and the studies. You know, walking people actually through literally how we run the tool and how we look at the output. That will, I think, be shaped based on the feedback we receive once this goes live, though. So the types of questions people have and the types of training and guidance documents we've already developed, we'll see how successful they are. And if there's gaps or you know, areas we can improve on, then we certainly want to do that because we want to make it something that everybody can adopt and use. There's a good question here about at what time in the future should existing dam EAP studies be updated to comply with the new PMP rainfall estimates? That's a very good question because, and I think that's a good question overall for not just EAP reasons, but you know, you have a dam, you have an H&H study that was done. At what point in time does that, you know, study expire? And there really is no firm expiration date, I would say. So there really is no firm date on when you would have to do the new PMP rainfall. I think my advice, and we encourage our staff to talk to dam owners and work with them on thinking what makes sense. So we would look for outside triggers, right, to update your hydrology and get your new PMP and inundation studies. So certainly if you're coming in for a permit to do a major repair or retrofit, that's one of our expectations is to update the H&H. So that might be done then. What if there's perhaps significant new development downstream of an existing dam? That's probably a good reason to reevaluate your inundation areas and your hazard classification. So that might be a trigger. And then in the broad picture, I think it's kind of about the timing of when that last study was done and the methodologies used. So, you know, we have some dams out there that we joke that, you know, where somebody pulled out a quad sheet and a Crayola crayon and kind of traced where they thought the flood wave would go. Right, and that's pretty old. Those should certainly be updated, right? But you know, we've seen such significant advances in both our data that we have available in the past few years and the technology. You know, we have really high resolution terrain data in Maryland. We've got Chesapeake Bay has watershed has got really high resolution land use land cover data. You know, we've moved, and we really think HEC-RAS 2D is really advantageous for people to use. So, you know, was your study done using a 1D model and a steady state analysis versus unsteady? all of those factors go into, I think, the decision on when it's time to update it, when it makes sense to reevaluate it. So I don't have a firm date, and I think that's probably a good thing because we don't want to all of a sudden cause, all these costs to be imparted on dam owners that you have to now. There's a new study, you have to, do all your work over again. But there are a variety of reasons when it makes sense, right? If it's 10 or 20 years old right now, it's probably time to do it over again. Just because, again, of all those new data, new methodologies that are available to run it. Jerry, missed this. Is replacement MD378 specifications been published and made available online? The answer for you is yes. And if you go to our dam safety website and look for the template under the guidelines and policies tab, we have guidance documents. There's a number of them, like our dam removal guidelines and the job aid we talked about. There's also template specifications for dams and small ponds right there. Follow up a little bit on the last question about updating EAPs too. Is I also do want to make it clear that we're not saying with the PMP study being released that all dam owners, even if you're not updating your EAP, need to immediately go out and rerun your H&H using the new PMP study. If you're coming in, if you're under design and analysis because you have to upgrade, retrofit, or repair your dam, that's kind of, would be a triggering event to run the new PMP. Certainly you're welcome to do it as soon as you wish, but we aren't intending to say, by October 1st of this year, or pick a date, everybody must rerun their H&H on their high and significant hazard dams. That's not our expectation. It's as the time is appropriate to reevaluate because you're doing other work on the dam. That's when it would make sense to do it. Does anybody, I'm curious, does anybody have any needs? We've got this, what is coming, right? And these are some of the things that we'd like to work on. And, the horizon for those is some of them is shorter and some of them are longer. But I think it's always good for us to evaluate from the community out there. Are there any, job aids, design needs, guidance documents out there that I guess are needed, right? Is there anything that's a thorn in your side that we can help you with? Please feel free to reach out separately or shout it out now, and we can try to look at where that might fit in and what the lift is and put it into our short and long-term goals. I don't hear any, so that's good. I guess we have a good set of goals then. Well, we might have reached the point of our office hours, as we always do, where the flow of information and the flow of questions starts to collide and get down to zero. So wait for a moment here to see if there's any last ideas or comments or questions out there. But otherwise, we thank you very much for attending today. Look for an email announcement coming soon on the PMP release. We'll also send out reminders about that July 1 date for the Appendix B to make sure we get permit applications routed correctly and efficiently. And we'll also, in a upcoming email soon, have a save the date and a link to join that April 30th webinar on emergency action plans. All right. Hope everybody has a wonderful day. If you're excited about the PMP study, as we are, I think that's great. Like I said, it's a very long and detailed report. It might be good, bedtime reading material for some folks. It might be like completely riveting for others, but I think if you really want to know about the science that went into developing a PMP study, I think it's all there and available for you. We'll keep on rolling out some guidance documents and tutorials. We've done some video recording, screen captures for how to do this, how to do that. We'll keep on doing that. And if anybody has needs or questions as the PMP tool rolls out, then please reach out to any of our staff, and we'll try to not only answer your question, but get it out into like an FAQ as well. So with that, I'll close the meeting. Thanks again, everybody. And we will hopefully see you in the near future. Bye.